What's up, guys? Welcome to the Comfort Zone Podcast, your place for some casual, comfortable Commander conversations. I'm your host, Dan. That's your boy, John. John, what are we doing here?
So today, we decided that it was a good time to launch a new idea we had. We want to talk about Magic, things we like, things we don't like, colors, cards, deck techs, set releases, old sets, new cards, old cards, our favorite cards, your favorite cards, and we decided we'd give it a go. The goal is to give you guys these episodes every week, just like our regularly scheduled gameplay episodes. However, be patient with us a little bit in the beginning, because we're still trying to ramp this idea up. And today, we wanted to get started with a pretty meta conversation about what got us into Magic the Gathering. So I guess, to get it rolling, Danny, what was your first set?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you watched a couple episodes ago, we kind of teased around chronologically when we started this game. However, my first set, at least the first cards I ever came into possession with, which we'll get into in a minute, but was actually in Time Spiral Planar Chaos block. Not Time Spiral Remastered, I mean OG Time Spiral. I think the first cards I ever got were in a Planar Chaos Fat Pack, if I remember correctly, and that's back when they included the novels in with the Fat Packs. Do you even remember that? And they weren't they weren't called Fat Packs back then, or were they? No, yes, they were.
Packs.
Now they're bundles. That's right.
Now they're bundles.
So
I more importantly remember that. Did you guys know that when you bought a Fat Pack, you got 2 boxes?
Yeah.
And the box arts, the top of the one box was like the side of the other box, and when you put the boxes next to each other, they made like a panorama on the sides, the top, and the other side. That was my favorite part about those Fat Packs.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. That is actually I guess I've dated myself for a while now, calling them Fat Packs, but that's where I'm from. That's the time of Magic I'm in, and I miss that, man. Like, now that you bring that up, I remember that. Yeah, you would get the 2 boxes, and the Planar Chaos one was beautiful. You had the like Angel Fury versus, I think it was it Oros? Is that his name? The one of the dragons.
Yeah, I think it was Oros. The
Yeah.
Mardu. Well,
Yeah.
It wasn't Mardu back then, but Mardu.
Yeah. No, exactly. And you got the book and the packs and everything. It was really nice. So I do miss that. Modern day bundles are not bad, but I used to love the books and the boxes, and that's where I used to store all my cards. So, but yeah, either way, that was the set that I first came into possession of cards with. Not necessarily the first set I started kind of actively playing Magic during. What was your first set?
So I also, of course, if you remember, for the good people,
I knew.
also the Time Spiral.
Tell
block.
the people.
I had a Time Spiral Fat Pack, which thrilled me for a couple of reasons. One, because it wasn't the only product I got that birthday, but 2, I opened a Bogarden Hellkite in my first pack, which he was the dragon on the Time Spiral Fat Packs. So I thought, I opened this cool box of a game I've never heard of, and I got the card on the box?
Yeah.
That's nonsensical. The other thing I got was actually a Champions of Kamigawa snake deck.
Yes.
There might have been a 40 card or 6, I don't remember, and it had like the one snake lady gave like +0/+1, and then the snake warrior gave like +1/+0. So that was actually the first like thing of cards that I could take, and I could shuffle terribly. I bent so many cards, and actually like shuffle together to play. And I didn't have sleeves. I did not own sleeves.
Yeah, so actually, neither did I, but more to the point, I wasn't gifted like a pre-constructed deck at the time. So when I just had those cards, I had no concept of how to play. I don't even know if you saw this deck, but at first when I was trying to figure out how to play, I thought you basically mana bonded like right out the get-go. So I thought that the way you played was you could drop any number of lands a turn. I also thought that you Damia Stone Saged as a passive ability, basically that at every turn you drew up to 7 cards. So I didn't understand like what people were doing like with the decks that they were constructing. I'm like, wow, man, like you're missing power out the wazoo. So the very first thing I threw together ever, period, I didn't play it with like real people, except for like a couple dudes I knew that I just showed it to, who very quickly corrected me on my rules. But I had literally made a pile of cards that was just lands, and a couple of fireball-esque spells. I don't remember the name. I wish I could look it up real quick. Maybe I will. But it was some kind of burn spell. It was some X and red. It was like a fireball, but at the time it had some extra ability on it. But basically that was the plan, was to draw 7 cards each turn, drop like 6 lands, get up to 20 mana in a couple turns, and then just shoot 20 damage to face, which I was like, why? Like, who plays this game? That seems insane.
I definitely did not see that deck.
Okay.
There's no way. But I do, again, I don't want to jump the gun, but I do remember a lot of dropping all the lands from your hand with a Scion of the Ur-Dragon. I do remember that. But yeah, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. But no, so drawing 6 cards a turn and just playing Fireball on like turn 3, that sounds fun.
Yeah, I mean, it was like fun in theory, but I also like had no grasp on the game. And at the time I was like, yo, this is way too insane. Like, why isn't every deck out there just like some fireballs and lands? Obviously I quickly learned that. I had a couple friends, back in the day who, before like me and you got into Magic together, ancillary, I knew these guys who kind of got me more into the game. Now, they also kind of took me for a ride a little bit because I didn't know secondary market stuff. There wasn't a lot of that information around back then. So a lot of like knowing the value of cards came through knowing kind of the meta. And the only way you really knew a lot about the meta was actually going out and playing, as opposed to having access to all these databases and media content.
Oh yeah, we did not have EDH Rec. We did not have Scryfall. We had The Gatherer, which I definitely didn't know about at the time, but it was there for some people.
Didn't even use that immediately.
And we had a lot of convoluted advanced search.
Yeah, exactly. So you were really just like reading the bones, like to try and figure out how to put a deck together, at least in my experience. Like at the age I was too during that time, I don't know, God, I was in middle school maybe. I didn't have a cell phone. I wasn't even allowed to use the internet very often. If I did, it was for school projects, which I didn't always do just school when I did it. But, I was able to go and play the random games that you would have played or whatever, much to the chagrin of my parents maybe. But we used AOL dial-up, literally. I don't know if you guys remember that. Like, this is basically an episode where we're going to talk about how old we are, even though we're young. Oh, yeah. But, like, you literally had to take a phone jack, take my landline off the wall, and plug the computer into the wall in order for me to use the internet during that time at my home. So, as a result, there was not a lot of advanced deck construction going on at the homestead, and thus I didn't really know the value of cards. Everything was relative, and I didn't have a lot of relativity at the time. So when I first got into kind of like wanting to explore the game more with these two guys, we were doing these trades and cards that I thought were terrible. There's one I remember back in the day, Carplusion Forest, which I just recently played in a game, was a card I had that was actually a couple bucks. I had no idea. I thought it was terrible. I literally remember thinking that card was such trash. Because when I saw it, I'm like, why would you ever want to lose life to create mana? I'm like, there are literally lands that come into play and make mana. I'm like, what the heck?
The best part is that now, and I know we've made this joke more than once on this channel, I will throw my life away for fun. If you were like, hey man, I'm going to tap this land. Do you want to pay the life for my Carplusion Forest? I'd be like, yeah, sure, that's fine.
Yeah,
like, life is a resource. And it reminds me, I forget, but there was a snake that tapped to add mana. And I literally was like, why would I play a creature that's going to add mana? My lands do that. My creatures need to attack.
Yeah,
so, like,
no.
Why would I tap a card for mana? Me, who later in life built like 5 or 6 versions of Elf Ball related decks.
Yeah.
I was like, why would you want to run a creature that couldn't fight because it was a land? Like, who cares about that? Why would I run that?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that was the kind of world that we ran, right? It's like, all new players have that kind of like circumspect way of evaluating cards, but in today's world, there are all these databases to kind of tell you what's good, like right out the get go, and copy paste decks that you can take just right off of a source like MTG Goldfish, not a sponsor, and just download the deck list, purchase it through TCG Player, at a bargain, get all those singles, and then just come and run with it. Back in the day when you had to trade for cards, you had to find those cards and you had to figure out what made sense and worked. It was a little bit of a different process. Not, worse or better. It's just, time changes. It's just like how like AOL dial-up, well, most people will probably say worse, but it was a different experience. The world was a little bit of a different place. But anyway, with that in mind, eventually those two guys I was talking about got me into Friday Night Magic, which I kind of barely even exists anymore. But back in the day, FNMs were the big deal. Friday Night Magic was how you played Magic. It was the biggest like show up for any number of players, at least in my hometown. And Standard was the big cheese. So I remember,
oh yeah,
like really starting my more serious Magic journey through that lens, which I think is the same for you, right? Like when did you start tagging along, right? Your first tournaments were with me.
Yeah, we had played a lot of Magic together, but it really came in when I'm pretty sure I went to the Sports Cards and Collectibles down the street.
Oh, Heidi, shout out.
Yeah, shout out to Heidi.
Yeah.
Missed that. And I got a box. I think I first was going to FNMs. I got a box of Shards of Alara, which huge jump from Time Spiral. But I was content just playing whatever at home, buying. Yeah. I'm sure I bought random packs. There was probably some Yu-Gi-Oh thrown in there at some point. But
yeah, well, you remember that time we went to that Yu-Gi-Oh tournament? Sorry to
no, go ahead.
But do you remember when we got absolutely blasted at that Yu-Gi-Oh tournament?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely some amount of like, you walk in somewhere and you think that you have a deck that does things, and you think you have a deck that like can hold its own, and we got the floor wiped with us, which was hilarious.
Which altogether wasn't that different as far as like the Magic experience either at the beginning.
Bro.
Well, maybe not for you, because your first deck was...
Yeah, so for anybody who's watched episode 6, our little Ixalanian duel, I played a mono black vampire commander deck, and that was my first actual standard legal deck. I remember that there were a lot of vampires, and that was up in Zendikar. So even though I bought the shards, like again, it was a bit of a jump until I started like regularly going to FNMs. I might have borrowed a deck from you or from Pat because again, I remember shards.
Yeah.
And I had built like some like jank Nea deck where I thought Woolly Thoctor, 3 mana 5/5 or something.
Yeah.
I thought he was the cool. I was like, cards with 3 colors in their mana cost. What are these?
Well, some of those were good. They were like the
oh my god, your Godsire
guys or whatever. Yeah.
But either way, Tat making 8/8. But yeah, so vampires, being my first standard legal deck, Vampire Nocturnus with a Nighthawk and a Vampire Lacerator, and then like the occasional sideboarding in a Black Knight, because let me tell you, I don't remember what deck they were running, but I very deeply remember all the game ones I had to go up against a White Knight and just couldn't do anything.
Yeah.
2 for 2/2 first strike pro black.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot you could do against that.
Yeah, exactly.
I can guarantee, I do not know the exact number, but I can guarantee I went at least 4 FNMs before I was like, is there something I could do against that in the sideboard?
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure you were the one who was like, yeah, Black Knight's the same thing, just black. And I was like, okay, but what do 2 creatures with protection do against each other? That wasn't even a rule I had encountered yet.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, I was a little bit earlier to the FNMs because I think eventually it was through me I kind of pulled you along because we were playing Magic together anyway, so eventually we started going. But
you and Pat,
so like a while before that I was going for a period of time, and I started with Lorwyn Block was my first it was my first like booster box opening experience, and it was the first time I ever really started trying to go to FNM's tournament style gameplay, so on and so forth. Back in that time, it was $5 for an FNM, mainly standard. And the first deck I ever tried to make happen, I don't know if anybody remembers this card. I don't think it really sees play anywhere, but it was called Everstrike or Evershriek. It was in, I think, Morningtide or Eventide. It was a guy, he liked to be like Enchantment Aura or something. So I think 10th edition might have been legal at that time. I don't know. Hard to remember. I'm old. But I played this deck.
A lot of sets, a lot of cards.
Yeah, I played this deck with like there was a card in that block that was I know it was a hybrid black-white mana for like a 1/1 with lifelink. So I played that with Edge of Divinity. I don't know if you remember that card.
Oh, yeah. If the creature's white, +1/+2. If it's black, +2/+1.
Yeah, exactly. So it ended up turning that thing into like a 4/4 lifelink or whatever, which I thought was so busted strong at the time. And then Everstrike, eventually, I don't even remember what he does, to be honest with you, but like something with the graveyard and auras or some junk like that. Maybe he got +2/+2 if he was aura'd or whatnot. I thought that was going to be absolutely insane. I built it terribly and I got absolutely like demolished. But eventually, my first like real deck, like the Everstrike deck is technically my first deck, so I have to tell people that for honesty. But my first like real deck, the Homage, the True to Form, like the deck I consider to be my first real big deck experience was Treefolk, with like the Duran, the Siege Tower vibe. So, which is really straightforward and somehow worked. That's the thing. Like, eventually we're going to release an episode where we talk about like getting new players into the game. And I feel like that was a great example of a deck that was perfect for a new player because it was easy to pilot. It was a simple concept. I somehow put it together and it won games, even with very limited knowledge because, typal, synergies, they still work and they worked back then. And Treefolk at the time was insane. I ran more Durans than everybody. I ran 4 copies. Everybody else like ran fewer because the legend rule wasn't what it was today either. So it seemed less pertinent, to have so many copies when they could be bopped in all these different ways. But either way, that was my first deck, like my first soul deck that I took to these. And it was quite a while, that I played that deck. I don't really remember the space between, but eventually when John started coming with me running vampires, I was one of the people at the time running the absolutely cracked Lotus Cobra, Knight of the Reliquary, Summoning Trab, Eldrazi ridiculousness. Very shortly after that, and I ran that for a long time too. But those were kind of like my decks that I really remember as like a highlight. I don't remember a lot of the other decks that I ran during that time. I guess they didn't really stick with me. Maybe I got way too beat up or something. But
I remember one deck that did pretty well. Not as well as Vamps. Still the only deck I ever went 3-0-1 with. However, I ran Elf Ball. It's standard legally had Llanowar Elf.
Yeah.
Turn 2 Elvish Archduid. Turn 3 Palaka Worm. Everybody else was running Eldrazi, and I was like, it would be great to run not Eldrazi, to float a bunch of mana and do something different with it. But you probably remember this, and I wish this deck had worked out. I tried running Living Lands. When they printed all of the animated lands, I tried running in standard. They had that.
I forgot that you did that.
Made all
in
your
standard.
lands. Yeah, that all your lands indestructible. So I was running like Celestial Colonnade and is it like Raging Ravine, whatever it was. Of course, the sadness when I like traded them all away for cheap because they were terrible, and then later in life they weren't.
But not in the same way.
I tried running Living Lands.
They became popular through like as control pieces, like control finishers, and like some kind of like Super Friends Azorius control, whatever. Like, but yes,
they were not for Living Lands tribal deck. That's for sure.
I did not remember you trying that in standard. I know that many times after the fact we've tried Living Lands in a bunch of different ways. You yourself too. Obviously, like we've both done variations on that. I recently did the one with what's her name? Oh gosh, Jadzi, and then that didn't work out. So like Living Lands, bro, hard to make work. Still, after like
days.
what, like almost 20 years of playing this game, and it's still a hard concept to stitch together. Now they did release that one Cynic Lady who's Living Lands base. I'm sure that some people have probably built her with a deal of success, but anyway, that's too funny. But yeah, so moving from that being our first experience with Magic, um, period, why did we like the game at that point? What about you? What made you stick with it? What was like the spice of Magic that kind of kept you around?
I mean, there was definitely a couple things. Um, as you remember, I was not the most going out
No,
middle schooler.
come on, we were
I
top
know.
dog. We were
Oh
so
yeah.
popular playing Game Boy Color Link battles in the cafeteria,
Hey
which was,
man,
by the way,
we were.
so cool.
It was the best.
It was so
Um,
dope.
so we were not the most social. So being able to go to a card store with like, I mean, there was that one guy who brought the Una Queen of Fae fairy standard deck in a metal briefcase.
Yeah.
He wore a suit jacket to
Yes.
the F&Ms. Do you
Suits.
remember him?
Yes, yes,
I
yes.
remember the first time I saw him, I was like, I'm in the wrong place. This is
Yeah.
not where I belong. But it was. I felt like it didn't matter. We were like 12. That guy was in his 40s.
Yeah.
There was people of all kinds of ages, all kind of backgrounds. And we were all just there to play Magic, which was like, aside from being in band and like choir growing up, like that was the first place I was like, I am deciding to be here. And nobody's weird about it.
Yes.
It was a super comfortable environment. I know that not everybody's able to quickly and easily access an LGS. I'm having trouble finding one to permanent myself in as
Yeah.
we speak. But I liked showing up. And, you know, we went every week.
Yeah.
By the time I got into it, you were like, this is what I do every Friday. And
Yeah.
I was like, well, if I can go, like, pick me up, let's go. Like, it was super easy to just like have something to do, and the game was fun. It wasn't Magic for me has always been kind of like a it can be as hard as you want it to be game.
Yeah.
Like some days we run dinosaurs, land, dinosaur, combat step.
Yeah.
And sometimes we run really intricate spell, response, counter, extra draws, combo. Like, it can be as hard or as easy as you want, and I liked being able to just show up and play edgy vampires.
Yeah, I mean,
was and will forever be an edgelord. Like, I loved it. I just come and
Edgelord.
play cards. I loved it. It was amazing. What about you?
I agree. Actually, there's so many points I want to talk about that you made, but I agree completely. I mean, for one, yes, to everything. Magic, I could fanboy about Magic forever. Obviously, it's, partially like our life, it's something that we now do, semi-professionally, but also, you know, it's a community, like I don't know how to describe it. Like, unless like you guys are out there, you're listening to this podcast, obviously you play Magic the Gathering, you probably know or have had those moments. Or if you haven't now, go find an LGS, or join the comfort zone community. There are people out there just like you, just like me, just like John, blah, 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 who, maybe we don't have a thing that really staples us into a group elsewhere in life, or if there are groups, they feel very exclusionary sometimes, or like you have to be one particular way or one particular thing in order to gain access to that group, or you have to be gregarious, or you have to be an introvert or whatever. And you might be asking yourself, well, where do you have to be that? But like, there are definitely communities that have expectation built into them. At least for me, in my experience with Magic, it's really been a very accepting community. And maybe that's not true for everybody, but at least back in the day when I was a young kid playing this game, I had that experience like yourself. I wouldn't necessarily have fit into all of the molds. I'm a very unique character in my own right, but at the LGS, at F&Ms, it didn't matter who you were. We were all there just to play the game and relax, and be comfortable. Life can be hard. We've all experienced it. When I was a kid, hard meant different things. You know what I mean? Like, school was hard, friends were hard, so on and so forth. Now I'm an adult, and money can be hard, and life can be hard. I'm sure y'all understand. But Magic Friday nights was always something I could come back to a comfort zone, right? This is kind of just an homage to that. This is why I've loved Magic. This is what we're doing here when we made our channel. This is the idea to have that escape, that community, the ability on your Fridays, on your everydays, once we grow to the extent of our ambition, to come somewhere where you can be comfortable, chat with people, get active in the comments, talk about a gameplay, get ideas, something to inspire yourself for your own deck brews, so on and so forth. But anyway, aside from that too, I stuck around with Magic because it's a great game, man. I mean, what can you say? Maybe it's not statistically true, but I'm sure at least of like the fantasy trading card games, the most popular trading card game in history, maybe. I don't know. Obviously, like baseball or non-fantasy based might, have a be able to be a contender, but it's that for a reason, in my opinion, because it is a product of passion, of thought, of deep analytics, research and development. I mean, it's a great game. This is why we all play. It's why we all come back. All the negativity out there sometimes doesn't stop people from playing the game because it's good, and to your point again too, like of changing what we do often, that's something where like eventually like we'll have episodes where we talk more about the commander format too. That's something I think is really enabled by that format, the reason I love that format. But Magic has always let us express ourselves creatively. It's a medium for expression in a weird way, especially back then with the harder accessibility to information. I felt that expression through deck building, even in the more standardized formats like standard, still left room for creativity and self-expression, which I think is something really cool to do in the context of a game, right? It's not like Parcheesi or something where you sit down, strict rules, everybody plays the same way. You got to be you at the table just as much as you got to participate in this game and be yourself in an emotional space as well, which sounds like you had the same experience.
Nah, most definitely. Like it didn't perturb me that I wasn't running decks that were like the most meta. It didn't perturb me that I was kind of, there was no issues, and no one really even took issue back then at like that I wasn't running the best deck. I mean, maybe not all of us, but I certainly remember Jace the Mind Sculptor and Nicol Bolas Planeswalker and Standard Super Friends.
Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Yes. I had a strong distaste for some of those games. Yeah. But no one ever looked me in the face and was like, why are you running Elf Ball Palaka Worm? Why are you running Living Lands? Some people chuckled when they watched me animate my Celestial Colonnade 3 turns in a row.
Yeah.
But it was no judgment. There was no problems. There was no issues with that. So it was like, play what you want. Especially with FNMs, like, I feel like a lot of people were like, oh, you're not running as good of a deck, but you get to be you, and I get to win, so we're all okay.
True.
It's kind of like no, or like sprouting Thrinax and that black-green worm that could get +2/+2. Don't remember what that was doing in Jund standard decks, but I remember it being mean. Yeah. And no one ever was like, don't do that. You can't do that. So the freedom of expression felt really good. And it still does. Again, as you said, Commander enabling that. I mean, I'm sure you guys over the coming weeks, months, over watching any of those gameplay channels, were listening to us ramble over here. Not every deck we've ever built was good.
Oh, God, yeah.
Not every deck we've ever built was fully optimized.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's, we can and we do. We take full advantage of that.
Yeah.
And that's really important.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking of that, let's go ahead and get wrapping this episode up with maybe just teasing how we first got introduced to Commander. How did you first get introduced to Commander, and maybe what was your first Commander deck? Without going into too much detail, we'll save that for a future episode.
Well, my introduction to Commander, and I think you'll back this up a little bit, is that you had friends introduce you to Commander.
This is true.
I did not have anybody else. And the first deck that I remember that we had they were your cards mostly, but I made you use my Bogarden Hellkite. Was a Scion of the Ur-Dragon deck. It was 5-color dragons.
Yeah.
We did not own Shacklands. There were no Triomes. There were no fetch lands to be had, especially by us. Maybe I don't remember when they got printed, but we didn't have any at the time.
Yeah.
And that was it. And my first set that I built, it wasn't Damia, but Damia was the first one I remember. I'm pretty sure I had built something before Damia. I don't think it was elves, but it might have been the initial elf ball deck. Because I stopped playing standard in Scars of Mirrodin, which is where they printed Izuri.
Yeah. I don't really...
And he was an elf commander for me.
I don't really remember. I now that you mention it, I literally forgot that you had the Damia deck. I remember you having it, but I don't know timeline-wise on that versus the elf deck. So, like, when I remember...
Yeah, because, again, Izuri came out, and wasn't Damia a commander deck commander?
She was. I just don't remember timeline-wise, like, chronology when that commander deck series came out. We could probably timestamp it if we thought hard enough, but yes, I remember. And yes, indeed, technically, just like I have to technically claim Everstrike as my first true to form deck. Unfortunately, the Scion of the Ur-Dragon was our first commander deck. It was kind of after I was introduced by a friend. I would name drop, but I don't want to, necessarily reveal the name in case he wouldn't appreciate it, but he probably knows who he is. But I was introduced through our LGS at the time to Commander, and actually traded for an Earthcraft at the same time because it was told it was a really strong card in Commander, and at that time it was not like $1 billion. I will later have used it in one of my first more official EDH decks, but at the time I just put it in the binder and decided to build this Scion of the Ur-Dragon because, hey, that was what EDH was, right? An opportunity to play these crazy cards that could shine in a format where maybe elsewise they didn't get to be played because gameplay was still, even back then, a little faster, a little bit more pushed. Now much like more power creep, but you understand. So yeah, the Scion of the Ur-Dragon deck, which didn't do anything pretty much.
It was so funny. It was so funny because I remember being like, maybe not, I'm not quoting myself from like 15 years ago, but I remember the concept of this is so easy to build. You can run 1 million cards, and it was 5 color. So we literally just went there. We're like, we can run every dragon. Does it matter? It doesn't matter. None of it matters. Yeah. We can just run all the dragons. It was great.
Yeah, it seemed easy on the surface to build, right? Throw dragons in pile, check. But with no mana fixing and a terrible curve, it turned
probably
out to
no
be
ramp.
It was more like the play 1 land per turn, not have the colors to cast the commander, maybe not even cast a single dragon and lose deck. But yes, quickly after that, either you had Damia or elves. Your elf deck, crazy strong, even though it was like one of the origin decks. And for myself, I very quickly after that, I also don't really remember the chronology, but I believe the first deck, because I made them very close to one another, because I quickly made a second deck. But I believe my first one ever was Rise of the Redeemed in a token build because of the card I had traded my friend for at the time for Earthcraft, because I was told that was probably the home for it, right? Some kind of token-based deck. And I happened to have a Rise Redeemed again. One of the first like booster box kind of sets I started purchasing cards in was the Lorwyn block. So I had one of those. It just seemed like a perfect way to kind of get into the game. And it ended up being a very strong deck for quite some time. Which is
kind of...
Yeah, it's less a testament maybe to like my skill at Magic at the time, and maybe more a testament to like the infancy of EDH. It was still kind of like a newish format coming into its own in popularity, and
I mean it was called EDH.
Yeah,
we didn't play Commander. We played Elder Dragon Highlander.
And at the time, the restriction of the single card was a much bigger deal. I mean, you think about how many years ago that was. The redundancy that's been printed since then has taken these card effects that back in the day were truly like you had one of them in your deck. You know, the best players maybe playing the most push decks had the tutors to generate redundancy, but even then, OG tutors like Worldly, Enlightened, stuff like that, still only had their single printings that were hard to find. You know, so tutors were not running rampant. You know, so like back in the day, like singleton format with EDH really made your decks, you know, variability like pushed way up there. So I feel like a lot more was possible back then, and decks that had, I guess, like consistency of speed, ended up kind of like being really strong just as a result. So Elf Ball, or like your first Elf deck with Azuri and Rise of Redeemed, the pacing kind of left them in a really powerful spot, even though maybe they didn't have this like game over game consistency of pieces. You were able to rip through your deck, have fast, high mana potential, which I think really kept them in a strong position. But anyway, so many things to talk about with respect to that. Moving into the future, of course, we could do all these conversations about, you know, the evolution of our decks, which we absolutely will do in future episodes. But we're going to leave that for another time. So now we want to open the floor up to you guys. We want to know more about your Commander journey. So definitely join in for our community, the comment section down below, or, you know, we're going to have a Discord out very soon, so you can hop on over there. And we want to hear about, how did you get into Magic and what were your first decks? You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be about Commander, but we'd be curious to, you know, hear why you stuck around. What do you love about this game that we love so much? And of course, if you do love this game and you're looking for a home, somewhere where you can just come kick back, relax, and get comfortable and talk about Magic and Commander and all these things that you love, of course, you can come and do that with us. Our main channel is a gameplay channel where we release an episode every Friday. And like John mentioned, we're going to be trying to hit weekly episodes of the podcast. That's our goal moving into the future. And of course, let us know what you guys want to hear us talk about, and, you know, whether or not you like this kind of content from us. Of course, also feel free to subscribe, because we want to see you here, and, you know, stick around so that you will be notified whenever there's a new episode. And as always, we'll talk to you guys in the multiverse.